The M4 Sherman is without a doubt one of the most famous tanks in the world. With almost 50,000 Shermans being built, it is no surprise that these American icons have made their way across the globe with a variety of different modifications being made to them. Many of these modifications involved upgrading the firepower of the tank. From the Chilean M4 armed with a high-velocity 60mm gun to the ludicrous 122mm cannon crammed into one by the Yugoslavians, many weapons have found their way into the Sherman's turret. Today though, we will look at one of the most successful upgrades done to the tank by the British during the Second World War. This is the story of the Allied tank feared most by the Germans, the Sherman Firefly.
Over a century ago, the first tanks entered combat in the Battle of the Somme. Since then, hundreds of designs have seen use in every conflict, from small local battles to the largest wars. Some of these are destined for failure, cursed by their own design. Those that succeed went on to shape warfare in ways no one could have imagined. Prepare to dive into the complex stories of tank development as we peel back the pages of history on some of the world's most iconic designs. Through ingenuity, sweat, and blood, these machines have been forged for battle.
Really quick before we jump into the history of the Firefly, I just want to let you all know that I have a brand new merch design which will be released alongside this video. Not to shoot my own 17-pounder, but I absolutely love how it turned out, especially when printed on a black shirt. For those of you not interested in a shirt, I also have a slightly different take on the Firefly design in the form of this sticker. For some reason, you guys keep wanting to put things in jars, so I went ahead and did it for you with these. Go grab a shirt or sticker using the link in the description, which will take you to my website, ConeOfArc.com, where you can use this code, FIREFLY, to get 10% off your order. Thanks for bearing with my self-promotion. Now let's get back into what you came here for. Following its introduction to combat in October of 1942 in the hands of the British Army, the Sherman would quickly become a common sight on the battlefield. Boasting good frontal armor and a versatile 75mm cannon, these tanks were not just equal to the German armor, but in many cases were superior to them. Tanks such as the Panzer III and Panzer IV, which made up much of their armored forces, were fairly easy prey for these new American machines. Though it was by no means immune to enemy firepower, the M4 Sherman proved itself to be a reliable and effective vehicle rather than the death trap some today claim it to be. That being said, as new German panzer types began to appear in larger numbers, it quickly became apparent that the 75mm gun M3 which the Sherman carried was quickly becoming inadequate against these thicker armored vehicles. It is worth noting though that these Shermans were not entirely incapable of dealing with these enemy tanks. By engaging the Panther or Tiger on its flanks, the 75 could still reliably pierce their armor, as we see from multiple accounts during World War II. We're here to talk about the Firefly though, so that topic will have to wait for another day. Not being able to reliably engage with an enemy tank head-to-head was by no means an optimal scenario, so it should come as no surprise that plans to upgun the Sherman were already underway. For the Americans, this would result in the 76mm armed M4s, but the British had some plans of their own. Similarly to the Sherman itself, the British 17-pounder entered service around the end of 1942 with forces in North Africa and the Middle East. This weapon had been designed in the years prior as a replacement for the less powerful 6-pounder with the capabilities to defeat 120 to 150mm of face-hardened armor. This resulted in a 3-inch or 76.2mm cannon firing a 17-pound projectile, which far surpassed the around 80mm of penetration the previous AT gun managed. With this excellent performance, it should come as no surprise that this gun was desirable for use in tanks. This was something which was planned from the start for the 17-pounder, with plans for a vehicle based on the Cromwell, which would be known as Challenger. Unfortunately for that tank, we will eventually look at it in an episode of Cursed by Design, as despite being a good design, production of it was slow. With only small numbers of these new 17-pounder armed tanks available for the upcoming invasion of Europe, something needed to be done, and it just so happened that the British had a ready supply of Shermans just waiting to accept this new weapon. The design of this vehicle has become something of a meme in recent years due to the apparent hack job done to fit the cannon into the standard Sherman turret. However, though it required some creative adjustments, this was all considerably more thought out than a simple, gun won't fit, so put it in sideways. Before we get into the actual design itself though, let's briefly examine the name of this tank. Unlike the American designations of the Sherman, which began at M4 and continued with M4A1, M4A2, and so on, the Commonwealth forces instead referred to them as Sherman 1, Sherman 2, and continued on from there. When the time came to mount the 17-pounder, the chosen variants of the Sherman were that of the Sherman 1 and 5. Translating this back into the US designations, this means that they used the original M4s as well as the M4A4. Along with the number, the designation would include a letter denoting the armament of the vehicle if it was not the standard 75mm. The letter A indicated a 76mm gun, B indicated a 105mm howitzer, and the letter C would be used to indicate the 17-pounder. With this combined, the tank would formally be known as the Sherman 1C and Sherman VC, or simply the Sherman 17-pounder. The name Firefly was indeed used to refer to the vehicle by troops, but not in official documentation, which would use the aforementioned names. The exact origin of the nickname is unclear, but many believe it may be related to the muzzle flash created when firing. Whether that is true or not is impossible to say for certain. I know that's a lot of info just regarding the name of a tank. Regardless, I felt it was important to cover to prevent any confusion when I referred to the vehicle by these names throughout the rest of the video. Work would begin on the idea of mounting the 17-pounder into a Sherman sometime in early 1943. Several documents showing communications between the British and Canadians may indicate some discussions in mid-1942, but it is hard to say if this is simply related to the A-30 Challenger project or directly to Canadian Sherman production. Exactly how to go about this conversion took some time to figure out, with one failed attempt in June of 43 being to mount the gun rigidly into the turret, bypassing the need for recoil management. With the immense recoil of the cannon, this was far from ideal as it could cause significant damage to the vehicle after repeated firing. At this point, the project was nearly shelved entirely, with only the influence of Lieutenant Colonel George Witheridge, who was involved in the project, keeping it from being shut down. Thanks to this, and some important influence from the Australians who had successfully mounted the 17-pounder into their Sentinel tank, the Sherman 17-pounder would become reality by early 1944. If you'd like to learn more about the Australian connection, I will leave a link below to a fantastic video by Armored Archives which goes over that and some of the people involved in the project in greater detail. To accomplish this feat, both the gun and the Sherman turret required modifications. As you're probably aware of from the memes, in order for the breech to both fit and be operated inside the Sherman turret, it required the breech to be rotated. However, this was not done by simply rotating the original 17-pounder, and in fact, just about the entire gun was redesigned thanks to a man named William Kilbourne. This involved a new recoil system, gun cradle, and overall redesign of the gun's shape. This meant that the 17-pounders going into the Sherman turret were of an entirely different design than that of the standard AT gun variant. These new cannons were designated either Mark IV or Mark VII. Similarly, the turret required significant modification, although less than you might think. Probably the biggest change was that of the armored radio box attached to the back of the turret and a cutout to the turret itself to allow it to be operated. This freed up additional space in the turret for operation of the radio as well as for reloading the gun, and acted as a counterweight for the new cannon. Improving over the original design of the turret, an additional hatch was cut into the roof to allow the loader to have one of his own. This was definitely a necessary change considering the breech took up considerably more space than the previous 75mm. More exhaust fans were also added to help vent the turret after firing. In order to fit the new elevation system for the 17-pounder, some modifications were also made to the turret basket. The turret face remarkably remained virtually unchanged, with the wider mantlet allowing the gun to mount in with relative ease. The elevation angles were impacted by the new gun, allowing for only 5 degrees of depression and 20 degrees of elevation. This was more limited than the standard Sherman, but bear in mind that not having incredible gun depression is not as big of an issue in real life as video games may lead you to believe. One additional thing you may see on some Fireflys are extra armor plates welded to the front next to the mantlet. These were applied to protect a weak spot caused by making room for the power traverse and was unrelated to the 17-pounder project. Later castings included extra material on that portion of the turret, making additional armor unnecessary. Some preference was also shown for the M4A4s, which had not had the revolver ports welded up or removed, as it was found the 17-pounder casing fit through the opening, but you can find examples with and without the port. Changes were not exclusive to the turret, however, with several also being made to the hull. The largest of these being the complete removal of the 5th crew member, opting instead to replace him and the bow machine gun with additional storage for 14 rounds stowed vertically. In place of the bow machine gun, a metal plug was welded to seal up the hole. Aside from the gun, the lack of a bow machine gun and the box on the rear of the turret are the easiest ways to identify if a vehicle you are looking at is a Firefly. Speaking of ammo storage, there was stowage for a total of 77 or 78 rounds of ammunition for the main gun, impressive given the original vehicle carried only 12 more rounds of slightly shorter ammunition. With only 5 of those being stored in a ready rack though, this only gave the crew 6 shots before the loader would need to fish for more from the less accessible positions. This added to the already increased loading time caused by a more awkward reload due to the longer breech and ammunition. At the end of the day though, it was clearly seen as an acceptable trade-off to allow for getting this new gun into action. With the first prototype finally completed sometime around the end of 1943, a first firing trial was held on the 30th of December with a total of 100 rounds being fired. Throughout this and subsequent trials, the tank performed relatively well with only a few relatively minor issues. In a report detailing the first trial, the conclusion given was positive, stating, "The Sherman appears to provide a remarkably stable platform for the 17-pounder, even when firing broadside." During these tests, the fire rate of the tank was found to be somewhere between 5 to 6 rounds per minute before the ready rack would need to be replenished. It was not all smooth sailing though, as the vehicle experienced some issues with the breech not locking open following firing during later trials, and even more troubling in some cases, there would be so-called flashback when the breech ejected a shell. Essentially, this was caused by unburnt powder igniting in the fighting compartment, resulting in a flash and flame within the shell case. This was not entirely unexpected, as it had previously been experienced in the Challenger, but was found to be more severe on the new vehicle. This was worrying, as if a remedy was not found, it could cause the vehicle to be rendered unbattleworthy due to this flaw. The flashback was never entirely solved in the Firefly, but later tests, including several men exposing their arms to the flash, found it to be harmless and not enough to cause severe burns, merely burning off the hair on their arms. This issue was found to not occur with HE rounds or when the tank had all hatches open, however, given that was not practical for a combat scenario, a few other solutions were implemented. One of these was an additional ventilation system which appeared to mostly solve the issue. In the end though, as unsettling as it might be for the crew the first few times it occurred, the flash caused no harm and only would really impact the loader if he was not far enough forward when the gun fired. Aside from the flashback concerns, these changes to the Sherman increased its total weight by around a ton, which was found to cause an increase in wear of the bogie wheels and springs, but otherwise impacted the reliability of the tank minimally. However, due to this increased wear and tear, the maximum speed of the Firefly was reduced to a maximum of 15 miles per hour or 25 kilometers per hour during extended road travel. This seems like a good place to make mention of something not specific to the Firefly, but still part of the meme surrounding it, the Chrysler multibank engine. Although this engine did show some issues initially which caused the US to dislike it, between Chrysler and the British, solutions were found for most of the faults and it resulted in an overall reliable engine. So despite the bizarre and haphazard appearance of multiple engines strapped together, it was not a horrible breakdown-prone design any more than any other tank engines, and the British seemed to quite like it. This may not have been the most optimal choice, but considering it was what they had in large quantities, it was the obvious choice. Within only a few months, production of the 17-pounder Shermans would begin alongside some final trials of these production tanks. This was done in earnest due to the impending D-Day of Operation Overlord, with the desire to have as many of these new tanks present for that invasion. As mentioned earlier, the vast majority of these were built on the M4A4 or Sherman 5, with some built on the Sherman 1 as supplies of Sherman 5s dried up. This would include a few of the so-called Sherman Hybrid 1, which was the M4 with the cast front. Reportedly, a handful were also built on the Sherman 2s, M4A1, as well as a single example of a Canadian Grizzly which had the turret mounted. The former was abandoned due to testing finding far larger reliability issues, and the latter not used in combat as it was intended only for testing purposes, which resulted in it surviving the war. For the purposes of this video, we can say that only the Sherman 1 and 5 were truly used for this conversion. Canada was not the only North American army to be interested in the conversion, with the US trialing the design, but found it not to their liking due to the less optimal crew conditions, which is somewhat shown by the Chieftain in his Inside the Hatch video on the Firefly. Thanks to the fairly simple conversion process, as well as the intense push for as many as possible to be produced, a total of around 318 were ready by D-Day. By the end of the conversions in 1945, the order of 2,100 tanks appeared to have been completed, with some placing the total number produced slightly higher at 2,150. Finding exact numbers proved tricky, and I spent a great deal of time searching through sources with not much luck at finding specifics, so let me know if you have more information on that. Having the exact number is not vitally important for the remainder of the Firefly's story though, so let's now look at it in action. The first use of the Firefly, and probably its most important, was during the D-Day landings in Normandy. Without a doubt, one of the biggest mistakes of this operation was by the US and the fact that they brought with them Shermans equipped only with the 75mm as their primary force. This left them at a distinct disadvantage against the newer German armor. This was not enough to allow the German forces to stop the Allies from pushing through France, but we can still agree it was a mistake which should have been corrected before the invasion began. The Sherman Firefly helps to prove this point, as they proved deadly to just about every German tank for the remainder of the war, with only the King Tiger variants being immune to their firepower on the whole front. This effectiveness was compounded by the introduction of a discarding sabot round for the gun. These did have a few issues with accuracy early on, partially due to the muzzle brake of the cannon, but they were hardly even needed with the excellent performance the APCBC shells already managed. One of the most famous actions involving the Firefly would likely be the connection it may have with the death of the famous German tank ace Michael Wittmann. This occurred when a counterattack involving him and other Tigers met with Commonwealth forces, in which Wittmann's Tiger was ambushed and destroyed. This is theorized to have likely been due to a shot fired by a Firefly, but the validity of this claim will likely never truly be known. As the war progressed, it appears many of these were utilized in a similar way to how the US would use their M18 Hellcats, with them being called on to deal with enemy armor specifically. The tank was not without flaws, including the distinct muzzle signature it created after firing, which both revealed the tank's position as well as blinding the crew momentarily, causing them to be unable to verify where the shot landed in closer range engagements. Again though, this was a trade-off which the British accepted and worked around in order to get the firepower their forces needed into their hands. Several experimental muzzles were made to counter this, but never produced for service. Even with the new Shermans armed with the 76mm beginning to appear, the Firefly remained the most powerful Sherman variant of the war and likely the most deadly vehicle the Allies had. With this success came concern over the Shermans with 17-pounders being targeted first by German tanks. To combat this, several methods were devised in order to conceal the cannon, making it appear as just an ordinary Sherman. These ranged from simple but effective camouflage on the barrel to fake muzzle brakes and even entire fake cannon barrels mounted on the rear of the turret. It certainly says a lot about your tank's success if it needs to actively disguise itself. Once again, if you would like to learn more about that, Armored Archives has gone into far more detail in his video on the topic. During World War II, Fireflys would be used by many nations, including the British, Canadians, Polish, and Czechoslovaks in Western Europe, as well as by New Zealand and South African crews in Italy. Reportedly, the US would even receive a small number, although these were not used in combat, as by the time they got any, the war was over. After the war, these tanks did not go away and continued in service around the world, with the British using them for a short time until they were fully replaced by Centurions. They remained in service with other armies, including the Netherlands, Italy, Belgium, Argentina, and Lebanon for varying periods of time after the war, with the last leaving service sometime in the 1980s. The Lebanese ones, as well as those that saw service in Argentina, did see further combat, as well as some of the Argentinian ones being later upgraded to become the Sherman Ripotenciado. But that is a story for another day. Sweden also trialed the tank, although did not end up adopting it. They did still utilize it for some tests later while working on the STRV-103 program, as the chieftain mentions in his Inside the Hatch video on the Firefly, which is held in the Arsenalen Museum. That is not the only example of a surviving Firefly, with several others around the world in various collections or outside displays. Before we end the video, I have one last thing to add regarding the Firefly in Italian service. More specifically, something I have been unable to fully explain with the information I have. This began when I was asking around about why the Firefly in War Thunder can carry 80 rounds of ammo, given as we discussed today, this is higher than the true 77 to 78 round supply. A minor thing, but I figured it was worth asking. This led me to the fact that the Italian Tipo has both lost the additional ammo stored in the bow gunner's position, but also regained that crew member. At first I assumed this was another Stur-Emil situation, as we discussed in my video on that vehicle where they added a crew member where the fuel tank should go, but it is actually more confusing than that. Photos and other documents suggest that Italy, for whatever reason, removed that ammo rack in their Fireflys and added back the crew member, but do not appear to have replaced the whole machine gun. Why exactly they did this I have not been able to figure out, so it will likely remain a bit of an odd quirk for those particular vehicles. This does, however, indicate that the Italian Sherman VC in War Thunder would also have the same alteration. This may seem like a nitpick to many of you, but these sorts of minor changes can add a significant amount to the history of a vehicle and its service life. So if you know anything about this, please feel free to let me know, and I will gladly revisit this topic in the future. As for the slightly increased ammo counts of the other Fireflys in game, I have no idea where that comes from. So now, I want to know, what is your opinion on this interesting example of when a cursed design succeeds? Let me know down in the comments. If you haven't already, make sure you leave a like on the video while you're down there, and click on the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss any of my new uploads. Now that you've learned all about this tank, you can also grab my new merch design I mentioned earlier with the code FIREFLY to get a discount on your order. I want to give a special thanks to Ed from Armored Archives, Jeremy Rosenblad, and everyone else who helped with fact-checking the video as well as providing me some additional info. Same goes to Peter from Tank Archives, who helped point me to some of the Canadian archives which were relevant to this topic. Of course, thanks to all of you for watching, and to my YouTube and Patreon members who support my content. If you want to get access to some of the original documents and photos I have collected, consider joining. It seriously helps the channel out, especially now with the massive drop in ad revenue my channel has been experiencing. If you'd rather just support with watching more of my content though, here's a couple of my videos I think you might like. I hope to see you there.